All these iconic cities have something in common. This apartment building. Generally 3 to 5 stories tall, with easy access to the street, and occasionally has businesses on the lower level. They were popularized during the 19th century as a housing solution for the growing working class in urban areas when overcrowding was becoming a problem. Because of the immediate need for housing during this time, many of the buildings were poorly built with little to no ventilation or plumbing. But over time, laws and regulations were passed that improved living conditions in apartments. And they remained popular in urban areas even among the affluent who owned flats with up to 6 bedrooms. Today, low-rise apartments make up the majority of inner-city housing in some of the most desirable and beautiful cities in the world. So why is it that these buildings make such great cities? First, let's compare low-rises to the more historically recent housing solution, the American suburb. The majority of space in a typical suburban neighborhood is grass and road. Every house has a large front lawn, a large backyard, and a large driveway, and usually a large garage as well. In a suburban neighborhood, the roads are so wide they even allow for additional on-street parking, spreading things out even more. Now imagine all that lawn space was removed, and all the parking was put underground, and we stacked people's homes on top of each other. All of a sudden, all those lawns become parks, all those driveways become space for businesses and schools, and all that extra road space became a bike lane or a wider sidewalk or even space for a rail line. Because everything is closer, all these modes of transportation immediately become accessible to more people. More people can walk, bike, or take public transit to get to the places they need to go. Kids can get to school safely without a parent driving them, and people who are unable to drive have options to get to work or the grocery store without having to pay for an expensive taxi or Uber. And the working class can get to and from work without having to commute in bumper-to-bumper traffic for hours every day. In a North American suburb, everyone is so spread out that many of these modes of transportation just aren't that practical. Buses and trains are infrequent and regularly arrive late. Sidewalks are poorly maintained or non-existent, and bike infrastructure is sparse and is often unsafe. Another problem with suburbia that low-rises solve is isolation. Part of the appeal of suburban living is getting to know your neighbors, having barbecues and drinks on the weekend, and waving at each other while you mow your extensive plots of grass. But this usually isn't the case. Most people in suburbia wake up, get ready for work, drive their kids to school while on their commute to work, commute back home, and maybe stop at the big box grocery store, then come home and drive their kids to sports and then drive home again, and repeat the cycle the next day without running into their neighbors once. Oh, and weekends are for house maintenance and more driving to sports practice, so there's no time then either. On the other extreme, if everyone lived in high-rises, people would probably feel overcrowded. Low-rises, on the other hand, have fewer floors and units than high-rises while providing comparable square footage to a typical post-World War II bungalow, which was enough space for a small family back then. People are close enough that they can actually get to know their neighbors, and if you live in a mixed-use building and there's a bakery on the main level, you might randomly run into your neighbors a couple times a week. Whereas in suburbia, everyone in a 10-kilometer radius has to drive to the closest power center to get fresh bread, and it's so out of the way that they probably only go once a week. And because higher density areas also have more parks and community spaces, there's even more opportunities to have random encounters with people you know, and even opportunities to meet people you don't know. Safety is another appeal to suburban life, but it's actually the other way around. People often feel unsafe in suburban places because they're desolate. What's lacking is eyes on the street, a kind of social surveillance where there's enough life and activity on the streets and in public places that people feel safe and secure, because everyone is being seen by others. It's why in places like Japan you can see kids taking transit and getting around by themselves. The reason this doesn't work in suburbia is because the only eyes on the street are coming from the inside of a moving vehicle. And it's not much better with super dense living like in areas with mostly high-rises because there's just too much activity. And that's why areas of moderate density are so good for livability. You have the security of having others around without the busyness of downtown. And then the last and probably most important issue that low-rise living solves is mixing demographics. Suburban neighborhoods are generally meant for one income class, and the same with high-rises. It's usually a luxury condo complex or public housing high-rises. Low-rise communities tend to be less exclusive, which means you get a mix of wider demographics. You have families, students, professionals, and the elderly all living within a community having opportunities to engage and interact. Low-rise apartments aren't the only medium-density housing option, but they're abundant in so many great cities around the world, and people love living in them.